chapter 4. Energy and the cell. Now, in this chapter, I'm not sure yet. I don't have like the activities set up yet. I'm not even sure we're going to have a packet for this one because we are not going to follow the sequence that the book uses. I don't really like how they treat this stuff, so we're gonna change it up a little bit. We're going to cover the stuff that the book has, and you can still use the book as a reference. It's just that we're going to change the sequence. All right, so that's going to make it a little bit harder to have a packet sort of thing, but I'll see what we can do with that. So energy in the cell, we're talking about how our cells get energy, or how cells in general get energy. All right, now when we're talking about how cells get energy, well, you guys probably already know this. Where does the vast majority of the energy that living things have come from originally? Where does it originally come from? The sun, right. So initially, now it's not true about all organisms. There are actually organisms that can get their energy directly from some chemicals like in the Earth's crust, for example. Like there's these little bacteria in the bottom of the ocean that can live off of sulfur and stuff down there. But the vast majority of the energy that living things use originally comes from the sun. Now, what I'm doing in this little lecture is I'm going to summarize this whole chapter, okay? The whole of chapter 4, which is what we're talking about now. And it's about respiration and photosynthesis. And I'm going to summarize that whole thing in one big diagram, and then we're going to talk about kind of a little bit more about how it works, okay? First of all, I'm going to draw a little scheme that shows the sun over here. There's the sun out in space. The sun is basically a big nuclear reactor. It's doing nuclear fusion all the time and producing a tremendous amount of energy that's coming out in the form of light, right? So we'll call this light energy or solar energy, right? Light energy from the sun. And then here I'm going to draw the Earth. Okay, that's the Earth. It's Africa. Okay, that's Earth. Now, Earth, what happens when the sun hits the Earth? Well, the sun obviously warms up the Earth, but here's the thing. If you just stand out in the sun, you'll get warm, but that's all that's going to happen. You're not going to get energy from the sun. Follow me? You can stand out in the sun all you want. You'll still starve to death if you don't eat food, right? You do not get your energy from the sun. You follow me? If you stand out in the sun long enough, you'll get tireder and tireder and tireder, and you will die if you don't eat any food. Follow me? Sun doesn't give you energy in the sense that we're talking about. Now, it does give your body some thermal energy because it warms your skin. That's solar to thermal. Did you guys learn about energy transformations, like converting from thermal energy to mechanical energy to chemical energy? So we're going to talk a little bit about that first. However, there are creatures, there are organisms on this earth that can get their energy from the sun. In other words, they can live just by being in the sun. What are those? Plants. So let's draw a plant. Okay? There is a plant. Now, here's what happens. the solar energy, the light energy, hits the plant. And then the plant converts that light energy into chemical energy. So the plant, or plants, convert light energy into chemical energy. Primarily, now there's lots of different chemicals that the plant builds with this energy. So think about it like the plant is almost like a solar panel. And the plant, actually it's the chlorophyll and the chloroplasts that are the solar panels. Those things receive the energy, and then they can use that energy to do things. What do? They build molecules with it. Cellulose, glucose, fats and oils, all kinds of stuff. Those molecules now can be used as energy. Very simple example. A tree is out in the sun. It takes all the sun's energy to build the tree over years and years and years. I go out there, I cut the tree down, and I can burn it in my wood stove, and it releases energy as heat. Transformation. Light energy, chemical energy in the wood, thermal energy from the wood stove. In essence, when I burn that wood, it's almost like I'm releasing stored solar energy. You don't think about burning wood as solar power, but it kind of is. You follow me? It kind of is solar power. It's just solar power that happened, that came onto the earth, that shined on the earth maybe 40 years ago. Stored in the wood. And then released from the wood. So, plants store it as chemical energy, right? Now I need to have a, I'm sorry this is so small, I should have, let me zoom in here. All right. I want to zoom in, and I'm sorry you guys can't do that, but here's a cow. This is a cow. Okay. Okay. That is a nondescript animal, and it's an herbivore. Okay. So this right here is an herbivore. It's a maybe it's an ungulate, right? A cow, is that classification of a cow, right? Ungulate. So it's eating that, and what is it doing? The herbivore converts chemical energy from the plant into other forms of energy. Into what? Into mechanical energy, because it's got to move. Into mechanical energy of motion, because the cow wants to move around, right? And I'm just going to put in parentheses motion. So the cow needs to move, so it's going to move. It's also going to convert some of that energy into thermal energy to keep itself warm, because it does homeostasis, right? It's a homeotherm, so it keeps its temperature the same all the time. Your temperature is just like a cow's. It's going to hover within a few degrees of the same temperature all the time, right? You don't want your body temperature to fall more than a few degrees below 98 or a few degrees above, right? So he's got to maintain his temperature, so thermal energy. And, lucky for us, more chemical energy. Not more, but some of the original is formed into other chemical energy, and I'm going to say here, meat and fat. So basically, the cow is going to convert, it's going to use some of that chemical energy from the plant to make its own tissues, its own muscle tissue, its own fat tissue. And then here we are. Can I draw it on the same thing? See, I'm going to draw, here's me in the ocean at my table, eating. That's me eating the cow, okay? Okay, Human eats cow. Okay, now this is a carnivore. It doesn't have to be a human. It could be a carnivore. It could be a wolf, a bear, whatever, a cougar. Something's going to eat the cow. Human eats the cow and does the same thing the cow does, converts that chemical energy to mechanical, thermal, and chemical. See, we store it in our own body tissues also. So hopefully no one's going to eat us. But if they did, the whole sequence would just repeat, right? If somebody ate us, did you guys ever read the book The Road or watch the movie or anything? Anyway, if somebody were to eat us, the same thing would happen. They would get that chemical potential energy from our tissues, from our fats and our meat, and then they would continue on. Now, one of the things we're not going to talk about so much right now, we'll talk about it in the spring when we do ecology. Energy is actually lost at every stage. So this isn't 100% efficient. In other words, the energy that I'm getting at my dinner table is not equal to the energy that originally came in from the sun. Because at each step, some energy is used up and lost from the system as heat going out into space. But we're going to get into that later. Okay, so this is the basic overview, folks. You got sunlight coming in, hits the plants. They turn light energy to chemical energy. By the way, plants don't need much mechanical energy, right? Because they don't generally move around much. Except maybe Venus flytrap or something. Mostly the chemical energy in the form of glucose, cellulose, fats, and oils, whatever. Then an herbivore eats the plant, or maybe an omnivore like us. We could eat the plant directly also. That gets converted into our motion to heat our bodies, gets into our tissues and so forth, and that's how it goes. Okay? So that's the big picture. Now we're going to narrow it down and get a little bit more specific. All right? The two most important steps of this. So we'll say the two key steps are two chemical reactions. Two chemical reactions. The first one is called, starts with a P, photosynthesis. Next one's a little bit trickier. We'll see if we can get that one. Photosynthesis. And the second one is called, starts with an R. E. S. P. I. Respiration. Now, listen though, this is really, it's potentially confusing. I'm not talking about breathing. And actually, respiration, one of the definitions of respiration is breathing, okay? So this is we love to confuse people in science, so that's what we're doing here. We just make a word mean two different things, okay? This is not breathing. This is, if we want to make it more specific, if you want, a good way to do that is say cellular respiration, all right? So put this adjective in the front of it, cellular respiration. Because this is something that happens in cells. It's not me breathing in air and then breathing out CO2. Although they're related, they are closely related. Okay, let's look at photosynthesis. We're going to get into a lot more detail on these, but I'm just going to give you an overview today, and then we're going to do a quick little lab activity. Photosynthesis looks like this. Light energy plus carbon dioxide, CO2. That's right, carbon dioxide, plus H2O, which of course is water, makes the sun's energy plus CO2 plus water makes sugar. Now, I'm picking glucose because that's what photosynthesis does, is makes glucose. What happens is the cell can then use the energy from the glucose, from reactions with glucose, to make other things like cellulose and fats and oils and stuff like that. But basically, you get glucose first, and that's a form of sugar. It's a simple sugar. If you tasted it, it would be sweet. That is blood sugar. That's what they test. People who have diabetes, they test the glucose levels in their blood. It's the primary sugar that's being used by your cells. What else does it make? It makes O2, oxygen gas. Now, this is not balanced. If you guys know something about balancing chemical equations, you see 6 carbons here, you only see 1 here, not balanced, right? So what we do is we just put some 6s in here. Now everything's balanced. I just put 3 6s in there. That makes all the numbers of atoms the same on both sides. The numbers of atoms have to be the same on both sides. I can't start with 1 carbon atom and end up with 6 carbon atoms. Okay? I can't make new carbon atoms. You can't do that. You're not allowed. Conservation of mass. So that's it. Now look, so what happens here is, if we want to say it in words, photosynthesis uses the light's energy, carbon dioxide and water, to produce, that arrow means produce, glucose and oxygen. The oxygen that you and I breathe was made by plants. Did you know that? If there were never any plants here, there would never be any us here. And it's not just because there wouldn't be any food, it's because there wouldn't be any oxygen either. Wouldn't be any O2. If you killed all the plants, it would be a very bad thing. We would run out of O2 eventually. It'd take a while, but we would. Okay? Now, the cool thing about this unit, this chapter gets a little complicated, but the cool thing about it is respiration is very simply the reverse of photosynthesis. So respiration is the reverse. So I'm just going to write this same equation backwards. I just wrote it backwards. There's only one difference. Can anybody detect the one difference between these two? Anna? Right. The only difference, there's only 2 differences between them. One is this one's backwards. It's exactly the same, just backwards. So really, you only have to memorize one of these, which you do need to do. What's that? Yeah, so you only have to memorize one because then you just flip it backwards and you got this one. So if you know one, you know the other. Just turn it around. Just remember which one is photosynthesis, right? To remember that plants make glucose and they also make oxygen. So that has to be on the right if it's photosynthesis. But the other difference is, you notice I didn't write solar or light energy here. When your body uses glucose, it does not give off light energy. It transforms it into something else. Okay? So it's a different form of energy. It might be heat. It might be, I mean, literally, folks, when you are walking around during the day, that motion that you're doing, just like your car uses gasoline, your body's using glucose or fats or proteins or whatever that it's eating. That's your form of energy. Okay, big diagram, and then we'll do a little lab activity to illustrate this. Actually, first of all, one more thing. Let's clarify this a little bit. What's going on here? How is this energy, is that energy released? How is energy released, and what does that mean? People talk about things like stored energy being stored in the glucose. What does that mean? It's not like glucose is a little battery or a little bag of gasoline or something. Okay? It's just atoms. How do you store energy in atoms? Here's how you do it. What does glucose look like? Do any of you remember? If I drew a molecule of glucose, it's a circle. So it's a ring of carbons with an oxygen in one of them. And then off of these carbons, it's got OHs, right? Something like this. This one has another thing coming off of it. Something like this, right? I could be getting this slightly wrong. I don't have it memorized. I know, kind of teacher am I. All right, something like that. Do I get 6 oxygens? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. Look at what the carbons are bonded to. They're bonded to each other. So let me just write a little note. Carbon, bonded to carbon. All right, listen carefully. This is the essence. This is the essence of the whole chapter. Okay? This is it. If you get this concept, you will understand it to a deeper level than most people in the world. Even your book doesn't explain it at this depth. It's not complicated, but just a deep level. What about this one here? This is what this one looks like. Those are double bonds. In this is CO2. That's the CO2. Carbon with 2 oxygens on the side. Here's the important point. Carbon bonded to oxygen. All right? Here's the deal. This is where the energy comes from. This switch releases energy. Now let me explain what I mean by that. What that means is carbon is not very tightly held to other carbon. So it's not very strongly bonded to carbon. It's a weak bond, okay? However, the bond, or I'm going to say this, it's more strongly attracted to oxygen. So, put those two near each other. Here I have a loop of carbons, right? They're kind of weakly held to each other. Just weakly held to each other. Put them next to some oxygen. What happens? They go, bam! They break apart from each other, and they snap together with the oxygen. And just like my hands snapping together releases sound energy, when they snap together, they release energy. It could be heat energy. In fact, did you ever burn sugar? Fun thing to do at a campfire is to throw a handful of sugar in the fire. It goes, sugar burns. And this process is the same thing as sugar burning. Now let me show you an example. Do you ever see these little toys here? Little buzzers or whatever. These are magnets. They're just like neodymium magnets inside here. When these snap together, they produce energy. See that? It takes energy to rip them apart. And anytime you have a bond, it requires some energy to rip it apart. But they could be pulled apart by a stronger magnet. Like these. These are neodymium magnets right here. These are stronger. So if I take this magnet, I want to break it. See that? This magnet's stronger. So it's kind of like this is the oxygen, these are the carbons, right? And this is the oxygen. oxygen. When the oxygen comes along, it'll separate, except it's not like that. It actually snaps, which I don't think I can do. Let me see if I can try this. So these are the carbons, except there'd be a ring of 5, right, with an oxygen, if it was glucose. Along comes O2. See, there's 2 of them. Now, they would actually separate also, though, because they have to get so that they're on either side of the carbon. But here's what happens. Whoops, didn't do it right. Hang on. This thing's too strong. I have to hold it. See that? It gave off energy, right? I had to break one bond, but when the other bond formed, it gave off even more energy. That's what it's all about, and that's how energy is stored in chemicals. It's not really stored inside, it's in the difference. The energy potential is in the difference between the bond strengths. So what you want to do if you want to store energy in a compound, you make a compound that doesn't have very strong bonds. That's how you make it energetic. Right? A compound that has really strong bonds is not a good source of energy, because it's like this here. It's hard to actually separate these 2 magnets. It's hard to. It takes a lot of energy to separate them, so that's not a good source of energy. Instead, I want something that can snap together really hard. See, these make sound when they snap together, so you hold them separately. This is why they're a toy. My dog hates that. So these are snapping together, right? It's giving off energy. So that's the main concept of chemical potential energy. All right. So let's draw a nice little picture here. And it's going to be circular, so you need some room in your notes. This diagram you are going to want to memorize. You'll probably have a version on the test where you have to fill in the blanks and tell me what the parts are. I consider this diagram to be the second most important part of this unit. The first part is what I just went over. Right? So this diagram is the first most important part, and up at the top it's got the sun. Okay? And before I mess this up, let me make sure I'm drawing it right here. Maybe I'll adjust it again, but I have to do something. I need another desk. I asked for another desk. They haven't ordered. All right. Hang on. Let's see. Yep, drawing sun.
Okay.
And we're drawing some other stuff here. We're going to have a bunch of diagrams in this unit because I think diagrams are a good way to learn this stuff. All right? So what does the sun do? The sun has light energy coming in. You see how I'm drawing them wavy? That's because we think about light as waves, right? Light waves. So light waves are coming down. Those aren't supposed to be heat waves. That's light. We're not talking about heat, although the sun does heat things up. We're talking about the light that actually powers the chloroplasts. It's not the heat from the sun. The light is coming in. Now, what are they coming into? They're coming into the chloroplast. I should have drawn it a little smaller, sorry. Now, in the chloroplast are these things we'll be talking about, called the thylakoid membranes. They're like little stacks of membranes, like stacks of pancakes. And in those little membranes, that's where the chlorophyll is, the green stuff. And it's that green stuff that catches the light. Okay? The green pigment called chlorophyll catches the light. But this isn't a very complicated diagram, so I'm not going to label all those parts of it. Now draw an arrow going around like this. So this is a cycle, see? It's a cycle. And on this side, I'm going to have to shrink this, darn it. Sorry. So on this side now, what do we make? The chloroplast makes glucose, we'll say sugars, and oxygen. It also makes other stuff, right? Don't forget, it could be cellulose, it could be oils, things like that. You know, think about corn oil, for example. A lot of calories in corn oil. So there's other compounds that store energy. Now, those things come down here, and they go into the mitochondrion. Now, the mitochondrion kind of looks like this. It's got all these folded up membranes inside of it. So this is the mitochondrion. Now remember, this is one of the reasons that I had you spend so much time talking about Lynn Margulis, because her theory focused on these two organelles, mitochondria and the chloroplast. They happen to play a key role in energy, both of them. So it comes down to the mitochondrion. Now the mitochondrion produces, bad arrow, sorry, that's an arrow. What that? What'd you say? It probably is. You're right. I'm sure there is. I don't know if I could get it to bend like that. Maybe I could.
There's probably one that bends and you just size it.
I'll have to look. I'll have to try that out. All right, over here, CO2 and H2O. Now, I think one of the most common mistakes is for students to switch these up. So, like, to think that the mitochondria are producing oxygen, right, and reverse this. You're just going to have to memorize that. And then the CO2 and the H2O are used by the chloroplast to complete the cycle. See that? So here's the thing. The carbon and the oxygen and the hydrogen do not get used up over time in the Earth. Okay? If you look at the whole Earth, those chemicals don't get used up. They just keep getting recycled over and over and over again. This is a cycle. They get recycled. This isn't done, though, because I want something on the bottom here. The mitochondria also produce something else. They're going to produce energy. But they actually produce another chemical that is actually used to power the cell. It is called ATP. Now, ATP is another form of chemical energy that is used by all the parts of the cell. For example, it is ATP that actually powers the little protein pumps in the cell membrane. It is ATP that powers the ribosome and so on. You follow me? So the little parts of the cell that do all the work, all the little proteins, they can't actually use glucose directly. They can't. They have to use ATP. And so you have to have the mitochondrion to change the glucose, to use the glucose to make ATP, and then it gets complicated, but this is the basic idea. Now ATP powers most cellular work. Most of the work of your cells is powered by ATP. And then some energy is lost as heat. Of course, I shouldn't really say lost because your body needs heat, but your body's losing heat all the time. And that's actually energy that's going away. And it's getting lost into the environment. So heat. Energy. You know, you give off more heat when you're working hard, too. So some is always being lost. As your cells are doing work, your muscles are powered by ATP, those muscle fibers. ATP hits them, and they go like this, and that makes them get, they go together, so they get shorter, and that produces a lot of heat energy. Did you all get this diagram? I'll show the top part again for a minute, in case you didn't get all that. Make sure you've got this down. bottom part, the mitochondrion. One more thing. If I want to show photosynthesis, it's the top half. If I want to show respiration, it's the bottom half. See how that works? Respiration is the sugars going into the mitochondrion, making CO2 and water. Photosynthesis is the CO2 and water going into the chloroplast, making sugars and oxygen. So, photosynthesis, respiration. Photosynthesis, respiration. Photosynthesis, respiration. Photosynthesis, respiration. Respiration, photosynthesis. Respiration, photosynthesis. Respiration, photosynthesis. Respiration. Got it? It's a cycle. One is just the reverse of the other. But they're done two different organelles. You don't have these. Maybe someday they're going to genetically engineer people to have chloroplasts. Now, wouldn't that be cool? A bunch of green people who can just, no, literally, if that would happen, you could like lay out in the sun and your body would be making its own glucose. You wouldn't have to eat.
Yeah, but that would be so boring. You're like, all right, it's dinner time.
Yeah. Right, yeah, I'm gonna go. It's supper time. Go out and lay out on the chair in the sun.
And what if it's nighttime?
Yeah, what if you lived in Alaska?
You're right. You wouldn't want to live like in Alaska in the wintertime when it's 24 hours of darkness. You wouldn't want to live out there. So anyway, maybe they will do that in the future, but that is not possible now. So keep this in your mind also. Now here's the other important thing, and we'll emphasize this too later. Plants have both. Plants have both. Okay? So don't think that plants only have these, because then all they'd be doing is making glucose. They wouldn't be using it. Plants also have to do this stuff, so they have to have both. Okay, that's it for that. Any questions?
Photosynthesis has ATP too, right?
Yes.
They all have everything, it's just that photosynthesis.
Yeah. What we're going to do next, and not this time, we're going to look what's happening inside of the chloroplast and inside the mitochondria. We're going to see that ATP plays a role in both. Okay? But for now,